Hi, welcome back to the GM Academy. Of course, I am your host and instructor, Jim McClure, and we are working our way through the Combat Encounter series. And we are going through, of course, our 1.0 classes, and we are now at class 103, which is keeping the combat moving. So this is a very, very important concept, especially starting out, because like we talked about, combat's a lot of fun. It's something that regularly happens. Frankly, a lot of tables, there's multiple combats per play session. If you're playing a sort of a standard D&D, a standard Pathfinder, a dungeon crawl type thing, combat can be the bulk or the majority of what you're doing at the table. So one of the important things with combat is to keep it moving. It needs to not feel repetitive. It needs to not feel boring. It has to maintain that level of interest. So there's a number of ways that you as the DM can really help facilitate making combat engaging, keeping it fast-paced, everything like that to keep combat enjoyable. So the first thing to understand, combat should be focused on the PCs, the people at the table who aren't you. That is very important. The GM has plenty of other times to shine through world building, through narrative, through description, through a whole bunch of other videos here on the GM Academy that will explain, times when the GM can show the GMing prowess. Combat is not one of those times. Not to say that you should be unintelligent with the choices that you're making for your NPCs, but combat is completely PC focused. It is completely about PC interest and maintaining that level of interest. So what you want to do is everything you're doing is how can I make the PCs have more time and me as the GM have less time? So a couple sort of base ways that people do, it depends entirely on the system you're running, but for one, initiative. You can have all of like-kinded creatures or all enemies take turn on the same turn as opposed to spreading them out. If you've got 4 different goblins that are fighting the PCs, all 4 goblins have the same initiative. So every time they're coming up in round, and that way you're taking less time. The other thing is, especially you as GM, you need to have their actions ready and happen immediately. When it comes around for one of them to take an action, it's, okay, he moves here, he fires his bow, roll, miss, your turn. That's it. We don't need big, huge, colorful description. Yeah, maybe if we're doing finales or boss fights, it might be a little bit more on the description side, on the storytelling side like we talked about. But generally speaking, especially when dealing with mundane enemies, their turns need to happen quick, done, and gone. Back to the PCs, back to them taking action, back to them doing stuff. The GM's turn should be as short as possible. Don't have long thinking out strategies for your NPCs. No, you go, go, go. They didn't do the best strategy. Oh well, your NPCs died, the PCs won. You're doing a good job as a DM. Always think about during combat, it needs to be focused on the PCs. So from there, what we look at is a couple pitfalls that kind of frequently happen within running combat that can really slow it down. And one of the ones we're going to talk about now is finding a way to resolve combats once there's a clear victor. Let's do a situation where we have 4 of our PCs, they're traveling through the woods. We already talked about goblins. So, a group of 8 goblins jump out and attack them and combat ensues. Well, we're having combat. It's an ambush. It's a good, interesting situation. They've killed and cleared out, 5 of the goblins. 3 are left. 1's already injured. 2 are hiding in the backwoods with bows. And now they're all sort of spread out everywhere. And what frequently GMs do is then they go, all right, well, we're going to play out these 3 and combat's going to continue. The PCs already know who's won. There's no way that they're going to lose, but they just have to move enough squares to engage in combat to get the last 3 dead. It's not fun. It's not interesting. The interesting part of the combat, the ambush, already occurred. Let's move on. Find a way to resolve combat once there's a clear victor. Once it's clear that the PCs are going to win, resolve combat. Maybe the goblins run. The PCs have opportunity, to attack them as they're running away, shoot arrows at them, magic missile, what have you. But allow it to essentially resolve itself. Maybe they surrender. Maybe they run away. Maybe at that point they start negotiating. Maybe they beg for their lives. Find a way to take that, we just have to wrap up all the mooks. Let's get rid of that. Just completely get rid of it. Find a way to resolve the combat once there's a clear victor. That will go a long way to keeping combats interesting because it's no longer making the rolling die and doing damage boring, which is what happens once there is a clear victor on one side or the other. So that's another big thing that you can do to help speed things along a bit. The other thing, last thing I want to talk about here today is avoid repetitive actions and encounters. Okay. Now, when we get into the 201 series, we're going to talk a lot more about the 3 types of engagement and ways to design encounters themselves that keep them interesting and keep them fresh. But the big core concept of all that is to avoid repetitiveness. Avoid repetitiveness in combat at all costs. Look at your combats. You go, all right, the PCs just fought a bunch of melee-based sword wielders. Well, I don't want to then run them against another combat, against a group of wolves that are essentially just melee-based enemies. It's the same thing. Stand in formation, swing swords, kill them, range guys in the back. It's the exact same combat. It's got a different veneer to it. One was knights with swords. One was, wolves out in the wastes. But it is essentially the exact same combat. Look at your basic type of what's happening in the combat and try not to do it again within a campaign. If our good guys are fighting, NPCs that are both long range and close range, and they're in tight military formation, great encounter. Only run it once, because the second time you run it, then it's them doing the same actions over and over again to achieve victory. What you want to be doing is encouraging the PCs to think differently about solving the encounter. Not, we'll talk about outside the box thinking and all of that, outside the box thinking. But what we're talking about is there is a certain way, a best way to handle each situation. Could be multiple best ways. What you don't want them is to present them another identical situation that then again has the same best situation. They go, all right, form up, let's roll or die and keep going until they're all dead. That is another thing that really makes combat encounters boring. It makes them stale. It makes them drag on and on. So those are the few big things that you really want to avoid when you're doing combat. Again, we're going to get more in depth when we hit our 201 series here, about how to specifically make a bunch of good, interesting encounters in the 3 kinds of fun. But those are the big things you want to focus on with your time during encounter. It should be focused on the PCs. Everything you do should be for their enjoyment. You should cut down GM time, increase PC time. Make all of that happen quick. Avoid repeated actions. Whenever there's a clear victor, end the encounter one way or another, whether running away, surrendering, begging for their lives, whatever the case may be, end the encounter. All of that to reduce and remove repetitiveness of combat, because that is truly what makes it boring. Doing the same thing over and over again when you already know the outcome. There we go. That's been our 103 class on how to keep combat interesting, how to keep it lively. Class dismissed. Thank you for watching the GM Academy. You can click the video to see all of our classes on combat encounters, and you can subscribe to get all of the latest information and videos from the GM Academy. If you enjoyed what you saw here, please hit the like button. It really does help us continue to put out good quality information to the community. Again, thank you for watching, and thank you for your support.